River panel. This is talking about Colorado River and sustainability. We are joined today by three people who have done a lot of work on the Colorado. And before I introduce them, I just want to talk a little bit, give you a little bit of background about the Colorado River. The Colorado River drains 250,000 square miles in the United States and Mexico, from the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California. Goes through 7 states, 29 Native American tribes, and 2 nations. And it is a driving force for many. The economic value of the Colorado River is $1.4 trillion annually. Now, the Colorado River has experienced a severe and crippling drought. This has put a strain on river supplies, the environment, and many international and interstate agreements on how to operate and share the waters of the Colorado River. In light of that challenge, 2 nations, state governments, tribes, and NGOs have stepped up to navigate new agreements on operating the river and addressing climate change. So with that, I want to introduce our panel members, and then I'll turn it over to Brad. Brad Udall is a senior water climate scientist scholar at the Colorado Water Center for Colorado State University. Ted Kowalski is the Colorado River Initiative lead and senior program officer for the Walton Family Foundation. And Daryl Vigil is a member of a tribe and several pueblos. He's the co-director for water and tribes in the Colorado River Basin. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Gimbel, and I'm also with the Colorado Water Center. So with that, I'm going to turn first to the scientists. Brad, take it.
Jennifer, thanks. It's great to join you and Daryl and Ted on this. So I'm going to spend time talking about climate change and the use of science by policymakers. I'll split my time about half and half between those 2 topics. First, let me note that since the year 2000, flows on the Colorado River are down about 17%. And the 2 largest reservoirs in the US, Lakes Mead and Powell, which bookend the Grand Canyon, have lost over 50% of their volume, total of about 25 million acre feet, or 1 2/3 year of Colorado River flow. Since the 1970s, temperatures are up over about 1 degree Celsius, and in some cases over 2 Celsius, as featured recently in the Washington Post, a so-called 2 Celsius hotspot in western Colorado. We expect somewhere between 2 and 4 Celsius additional warming by the end of the century. Since 2016, a number of peer-reviewed scientific papers have looked at this decline to find out why. And my video just shut off for some reason. They've looked to find out why. And let me walk you through these quickly. In 2016, Connie Woodhouse and co-authors found that the river was actually generating less flow for a given amount of precipitation. And they suggested strongly that what was happening was higher temperatures were the cause of this flow decline. A year later, Jonathan Overpeck and I investigated this, and we put about between 1/3 and 1/2 of the decline due to these higher temperatures, and said they were human caused. We also said in the future that between 2050, we might lose 20% of the flow, and by 2100, about 35% of the flow due to these higher temperatures was caused increased evaporation. A year later, I joined another team, and we actually ran a hydrology model that reproduced the flows faithfully, given the temperatures we've seen. And then we reran it without those temperature increases. And we found that about 50% of this decline was due to these higher temperatures. Last year, Marty Herling of NOAA and some University of Colorado scientists actually found that similarly, about half of the decline was due to humans. And finally, 2 papers this year suggest exactly the same thing. Chris Miller, the US, found that about 9% flow loss per degree Celsius is occurring, and he concurred with Overpeck and Mai's predictions for the future flows, although he also said perhaps we might get lucky and precipitation might increase. And then finally, another author suggested, a bunch of authors in science suggested that we've now entered an emerging megadrought in the American West. What we're seeing here is an aridification which is a long-term drying. This is not a drought. It's not a new normal. If anything, it's a new abnormal. And this year we had forest fires and poor water quality and a whole series of other problems that sort of underscore everything. So what are decision makers doing about this? So I gave my first talk on climate change in 2003 to Dirty Looks. I remember it really well, to water managers in Western Colorado. Since then, there have been enormous changes in the water management community, all for the better. And I'll tell you, they get this issue. In 2006, Reclamation, as part of their big EIS for what are called the interim guidelines in the Colorado River, issued Appendix U, which looks specifically at climate change. Water managers understand this risk. They're paid to do this. They're paid to manage risk and to provide water supplies as risk-free as they can. Reclamations continue to support climate change research, and in fact, they're strongly encouraged by a 2009 federal law called the Secure Water Act. In the system, water managers are looking at painful water cuts to meet this risk. Recently, in what's called the Drought Contingency Plan, water managers from the lower basin states agreed to additional cuts to prevent Lakes Mead and Powell from falling to critical water levels. My hope is that all of this science gives water managers the incentive they need to discuss and prepare how to manage a system with vastly reduced flows. Scientists are setting up warning flares right and left, and at the same time, nature is underscoring these reports with their own powerful statements. This year, we had 100% of snowpack above Lake Powell on April 1, and we ended up with 52% of runoff. I think that's unprecedented, actually. I can't say that without a little caveat because I hadn't dug into it, but it's a really serious decline in what we would. This year, we had the hottest July-August period ever in 126 years of record keeping, and scientists are now flipping this around and saying, don't think of this as the hottest in the last 126 years. Think of it as one of the coolest set of months for the next 300. We got lots of work to do, but I'm really encouraged by the water managers and how they've taken this task head on.
Thanks, Brad. Ted.
Yes, my name is Ted Kowalski, and I work for the Walton Family Foundation. And the Walton Family Foundation was established to give back in three main areas: education in the home region of Arkansas and in the environment. And our mission for the environment program is to protect water resources in the face of climate change, to support healthier ecosystems and vibrant communities for generations to come. And I work primarily on the Colorado River Basin. We also work in the Mississippi River Basin and in the oceans habitats, working on sustainable fisheries. And within the Colorado River Basin, our goal is primarily to live within our means. We recognize, as Brad just described in great detail, the problems that we're facing with an already over-allocated system, and a system that is going to have to continue to be able to do more or a lot of the current uses with less water. And we want to make sure that the environment and the river is not forgotten in the way that we manage the river. And we think we can offer opportunities and tools and encourage conversations to help communities recognize that they have challenges ahead and try to manage those challenges with the least amount of disruption and provide the most amount of tools to make sure that the environment and the communities can survive, and not only survive, but thrive. We primarily try to do our work in four buckets. First, we focus on restoring habitats and protecting habitats that currently exist. One of the most dramatic areas in which we've done this work has been in the context of Mexico. Many people are often surprised to hear that the Colorado River has not flowed to the sea for a generation. Really, the only time it flowed within the last many decades was through cooperation, through an agreement that existed between and was negotiated between the US and Mexico. And many of the environmental groups that we support helped bring that agreement to bear, where for the first time in decades, the Colorado River flowed to the sea. We'd like to see that occur more often. We'd like to see the restored riparian areas that we've worked with Mexican NGOs come back and be thriving and supporting the habitat that they had supported for generations before us, and bring back that delta, the Mexican Delta. The second area in which we really closely work with states and water utilities and other partners is helping them recognize the value of water conservation. In the Upper Basin, we talk about it in terms of demand management, where we work with farmers and ranchers who voluntarily, temporarily, and in a compensated manner can reduce their water uses by either fallowing a field temporarily, or growing one crop of hay instead of two, or crop switching, and reducing their water use and allow that water to flow in the river down to Lake Powell and increase their water security for the Upper Basin states, as well as provide environmental recreational benefits along the way. In the Lower Basin, it's a different construct, but it's the same concept of trying to encourage water conservation. And we played a large part in the most recent agreements that occurred, called the drought contingency agreements, whereby the states in the Lower Basin and Mexico agreed to reduce their uses as Lake Mead would hit critical levels. And that's to avoid a catastrophe of extraordinary proportions if Lake Mead were to drop below its intakes. And finally, we work on increasing funding for better water management, both at the federal level with federal public dollars, at the state level, local level. And then we also work with other philanthropic organizations to increase the amount of funding for philanthropic activities. And we have supported some recent innovative tools like the Open ET project, which is using satellite imagery to be able to calculate and demonstrate what consumptive use is at the field level scale of crops or agriculture that's being grown within the Colorado River Basin, although that's a West-wide project. But those types of tools, such as data and communication, can really be important as we communicate with water leaders and water managers about the needs to develop new tools to better manage this river system. And finally, the last area in which we also work is working with tribes. And we are working very closely with Darrell Behill and other tribes to make sure that they have a voice at the table as we negotiate the future of the Colorado River Basin. Maybe with that, I'll hand it over to you, Darrell.
Thanks, Ted. Go ahead, Darrell.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ted, and thank you so much, Brad, for the comments before. And always appreciate, interacting with you folks, and I just, one thing that always touches me or it occurs to me when Brad's in the same conversation or in the same chat room in this case is, just the urgency of this conversation right now, and sometimes, there's kind of a bureaucratic tone to our engagement about when we talk about the Colorado River, the issues around it, the sustainability of it. And, like we have some time, we don't, and I think, that's one of the things, definitely I'll get into in a sec, but, just the inclusion of science and it's never been rejected, but, there's been really no clear pathways in terms of this inclusion into the policy process. But just to build on real quickly, I think, what's already been said, in terms of tribes, and right now I'm working on a project called the Water and Tribes Initiative, and it's funded by the Walton Family Foundation. And really twofold agenda, is to help build tribal capacity and also to build on the collaborative effort that's already existed and that continues to be connected in terms of networks and different conversations being connected. So that's, kind of the context of where I'm talking about today. And, I think the tribes will continue to be there. We had some conversations earlier about, what is the tribe's role in terms of sustaining the river? And, and I think, from a historic standpoint, absolutely, we're going to continue to be who we are in terms of, our commitment to a sustainable way of life that, for most have been a millennia sometimes in terms of thousands of years of sustainable living in the basin. And coming to this place in our time, this point in time, for tribes where, they really are, kind of leading the forefront, in my opinion, in terms of, what that sustainable life and the sustainability of the river might look like and how they actually are interconnected to each other. And so I think, one of the things that's absolutely in the conversations that I've been involved with the 29 sovereigns in the basin and organizations like the 10 Tribes Partnership of the Colorado River, and also the Intertribal Council, as well as numerous conversations with NGOs, state governments, federal governments, in terms of their specific experience of tribal interaction, and really trying to articulate the forward path in terms of, number one, what remains to be, at the heart of, a lot of these conversations is just, an acceptance and acknowledgement and honoring and a respect of tribal sovereignty. And then inside of that, those rights that come with it that are most of the time just basic human rights, and like the water rights. And so having that recognition is just still something that, that we continue to be an advocate for, and then that we continue to push for, because sometimes it doesn't exist depending on, what basin state you're in or what federal organization you may be relating to. So still that exists. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for tribes is not desire or lack of heart or commitment into to being a part of this. It's about that recognition of that tribal sovereignty. And along with that is the federal government's trust responsibility to create those pathways or create structures for engagement. And I think that's at the center of all the conversations right now that are revolving around, the creation of a new framework of guidelines for the Colorado River Basin that are absolutely that need to be inclusive of voices that weren't inclusive before. And at the top of that list, in my mind, are tribes, in terms of, some of those statistics in terms of, 3 million acre feet of water rights in the Colorado River Basin, which is 20 to 25% of the total volume of the Colorado River. And as Brad mentioned, as climate change impacts, that percentage of tribal water rights percentage increases, because they're usually the most historic rights in the basin. So all those things, in terms of making sure people have an understanding of why is it important for you to be engaging tribes in this conversation. And it's really sad, but we're starting to create these conversations and create the spark of these conversations in some of the basin states where there hasn't been very much dialogue at all. And given the nature that the value of the river that we all jointly put to it in terms of the political and policy world, it's just really amazing to me that we're finally starting to open that door of being related and understanding what being respectful and honoring of each other's needs, and at least be willing to look at a different pathway that acknowledges the fact that we're in a position, tribes for the most part, with pre-drought contingency planning, arguably about 1.5 million acre feet of unused tribal entitlement. And so when you take into account, on the positive side, when you see things like the engagement with the federal government with the tribal water study, which really was about understanding of tribal water rights and how unique they are to each tribe, that set the stage. And then you've moved that further to the drought contingency planning, where you actually have 2 tribes who were involved, and pretty much, in my mind, were pivotal to what the success of those that process. So we can see the trend. And I think, there's definitely a desire on the tribe's part, in terms of creating that platform of inclusion. And part of that inclusion absolutely deals with, our integration of nature and making sure that the ecosystems are protected and that nature is protected. Because if we're not doing that, then what is all this for?
Thank you so much, Daryl, Ted, Brad. That was wonderful. We look forward, this is the conclusion of our presentation portion, and we look forward to your questions and answers in January. Thank you.